Para esta presentación, tenemos el honor de contar con la presencia de Rajendra Sisodia, acompañado de Juan Pablo Murra, rector de profesional y posgrado del Tecnológico de Monterrey. La traducción simultánea estará a cargo de Ivonne Cepeda, de la Escuela de Humanidades y Educación. A continuación, cedo la palabra a nuestros invitados.
Muy buenas tardes. Me pedían preguntar, ¿alguien va a necesitar la traducción o todo el mundo entiende inglés? Nos seguimos en inglés entonces. Sí, pues muchas gracias. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us today as we gather to discuss the compelling book, Awaken, The Path to Purpose, Inner Peace, and Health, written by our esteemed colleague and friend, Rajendra Sisodia. Raj, it's truly an honor to have you here today. It is an impressive, thought-provoking, and insightful book. Very happy that this conversation is going to happen. Allow me to introduce Raj. He's a dear colleague of mine with whom I co-teach the subject, The Art and Adventure of Conscious Leadership at EGADE Business School. Raj is a renowned author, speaker, and thought leader in the field of conscious business and organizational transformation. Raj has dedicated his career to promoting the idea that business can and is a powerful force for good, leading to both financial success and social impact. Raj Sisodia is the co-founder and former chairman of Conscious Capitalism, Inc. He holds a PhD in business from Columbia University, and Raj has published 16 books and over 100 academic articles. He has served as a consultant and executive program instructor for numerous companies, and Dr. Raj Sisodia joined Tec de Monterrey as the FEMSA's Distinguished University Professor of Conscious Enterprise and the Chairman of the Conscious Enterprise Center at Tec de Monterrey. He has extensive experience as an author, speaker, and consultant, and has played a key role in shaping the philosophy of conscious capitalism. Welcome, Raj.
Very much. Can you hear me? This is an unusual setting, so I hope I can compete with the crowd outside. Thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to talk about this new book. You know, it's the first time that I've actually written about my own life in any of my books. And, you know, that turned out to be an interesting process. And I believe it's relevant to my rest of my work because, you know, when we talk about conscious capitalism, we're talking about conscious leadership as well. And I believe you cannot be a conscious leader if you don't actually work on your own healing. All of us need healing of different kinds. And this book is really about my own journey towards healing, but also what have I learned that actually other people can also benefit from and also heal. And all this started 5 years ago in 2018. This became a year of consciously trying to awaken to what life is really about. It was the year I actually turned 60. And that was a bit of a shock. You know, you think life is going to go on forever, and suddenly you wake up one day and you're, oh my God, I'm 60 years old, right? So that was, but it also becomes a pause and a point where we look back at life. It's like the beginning of the third act. We've gone through 2/3 of life. Hopefully we have 1/3 left. What have I learned? How can I live differently? But more importantly, how can I use my experience to help other people live happier, better, more meaningful lives? And the impetus for doing this book actually came from 4 women, and one of them is sitting here, Nilima, who's now my colleague and my co-author on a book, but she's also a colleague here. But I was writing a book called The Healing Organization at that time, which is about business as healing. That the way we normally do business creates a lot of stress and burnout and suffering and unhealthy customers and all kinds of challenges. And so I was doing all my research and writing, and my friends basically asked me the same thing. You're writing a book about healing. Have you worked on your own healing? And I said, well, I don't have time for that. I have a book deadline. They said, no, you need to make time for that. So fortunately, I listened to them, and I delayed my book by 5 months, and then I had all these experiences. I went on the Himalayas on a Shakti spiritual journey that Nilima has organized these kinds of journeys all over the world, from Machu Picchu to Israel to India to Croatia, and you go to some really meaningful places and have some deep spiritual experiences. That's where I had my 60th birthday in the middle of that region of Buddhist wisdom, the deep, the border between India and Tibet. I also went on a silent retreat, which is the opposite of this, by the way. But in those 4 days, I got so many messages coming to me. When you actually tune out all the noise of the world, you can then start connecting to source. And I had about 45 pages of notes at the end of those 4 days. And the steps that I'm going to talk about today actually came to me as I was walking around in nature with my journal during that silent retreat. I also worked with a coach for the first time, and I also went to the Amazon rainforest in Ecuador and spent 10 days with the indigenous people, the Achuara and the Zapara, and also getting a lot of healing experiences with the shamans in the rainforest. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So this is us up there in the Ladakh on the border with Tibet in China. For that, this is the silent retreat in upstate New York. And these are the steps that came to me. And that's what I'm going to share here today. That in order to get to healing, we actually have to go through multiple steps. How do we become whole? The healing means wholeness, and healing also means holiness. How do we connect to our own higher self? And we have to go through these steps of knowing yourself. You have to love yourself, be yourself, etc. So let's talk about those quickly. It starts with knowing yourself. Who are you? It's not your age, not your name, not your religion, not your profession, not your anything. But who are you? Who is this human? And that you were born with some unique qualities, right, from an early age. It makes you different from anybody else who has ever lived. So what are your innate qualities and what are your core values? What are the things that are more important to you than they are to other people? And we have to know these things about ourselves. Yeah, the journey of inner discovery is a lifelong challenge and a lifelong process. There's so much to know as we go inward, right? So you have to start with that. And if I look at my own life and my own qualities as a child, my mother gave me this nickname, Pappu, which means innocent one, right? So she saw something in me even as a little child. And I was very much like my mother, and she's like that as well. But I had these other qualities. I was very idealistic from a young age, very trusting, very peace-loving, harmony-seeking, quite sensitive, gentle, etc., and also ambitious. When I was 7 years old, the teacher wrote in my report card, Raj is an ambitious young man. So I don't know what she saw in a little 7-year-old, but something was inside me. Maybe that came from my father. Because my father was an incredibly ambitious person. He went from a tiny village in India without electricity or running water, and he went, get his bachelor's, master's, went to Canada to get his PhD, and then came back when I was 7 years old. So I didn't know my father until I was 7. So imagine that. Imagine not knowing your child until the child is 7 years old, right? And when my father came back, he saw this kid with all these qualities, which are the opposite of him in many ways, right? So the next step here became a challenge for me, because once you know yourself, it is not automatic that you love yourself, but you have to love yourself. And for me, because my father told me, you're too trusting, you should not trust anybody. You're too idealistic, you need to be pragmatic. You're too peace-loving, you need to be rough and tough, right? You're too much in your head, you need to be street smart. So everything that was natural to me, he saw it as a weakness. And when you hear your father say that, you said, oh my God, I'm just defective, right? So I tried to be the opposite. So to the extent that I knew myself, I kind of hated myself. I was ashamed of myself, right? And so that is how I went through life. And this is not uncommon. Maybe mine was a little more serious or extreme, but 80 to 90% of people on this planet do not love themselves, according to Bruce Lipton. And what I thought was, if you don't love yourself, you cannot love somebody else. But actually, if you don't love yourself, you cannot receive somebody else's love. Because even if they say, I love you, you say, oh, you don't know me. If you know me, you wouldn't love me, right? Because you don't love yourself, right? So this is a big thing. And when you don't love yourself, you are not going to take care of yourself. You will abuse your body, you will abuse your mind, you will abuse your soul, and do all kinds of things, right? Because you don't care. So, by the way, one thing I forgot to announce. So, if you post about this session and this book on our social media, cec.tech.mx, using that hashtag on any of Facebook or LinkedIn, etc., then Mar over there, she has 5 books for the first 5 people who post, okay? So you have to love yourself. You have to embrace your qualities. The fact that I'm trusting and I'm idealistic and I'm peace-loving, these are my strengths. But it took me 40, 50 years to see them as a strength. And that this is what I need to bring to the world. These are the gifts that I was given, But really, I was given those gifts so I could bring them into the world, and that is true for all of us. What makes you unique and special is what the world needs. And so we have to connect to that, and we have to love ourselves to be able to bring that. So what I saw as a weakness actually became my strength. And then I could bring that into the world. So you have to embrace those qualities. You have to forgive yourself. Most of us carry some guilt and some shame about things that happen in our life, things that we may have said and done, right? As you go through life, that's inevitable. And we will forgive somebody else for those things, but we don't forgive ourselves. And we constantly live with that self-criticism and some kind of self-hatred. So we have to get to a place of self-compassion. Again, we have compassion for others. We don't have enough compassion for ourselves. And then we have to take care of ourselves, right? Once you love yourself, you're going to take care of your body, your mind, your spirit. The next is you have to be yourself. So once you love yourself, then of course you can feel comfortable being yourself. Otherwise, you're trying to act like somebody else. I was trying to act like somebody more like my father, but that wasn't me, right? So in this, you have to stop acting. Acting is tiring, it's exhausting, trying to be somebody that you're not. The one role that you're here to play is yourself. Right? And that's the one thing that you can do extremely well. And then the other part of that is to choose authenticity over attachment. What happens to a lot of us, in order to get other people to like us or approve of us, in my case, my father, you end up losing your own identity and you want attachment. You want the other person to approve of you, right? And so your authenticity is sacrificed. And so this is something that, it's called the dangers of the good child. When you have a child, so I was one of these kids, I always did my homework, my room was neat, I helped out, I never had a fight with my brother or sister. Everybody said, wow, what a good child. But the reality is that that child is not expressing their anger, they're not expressing their emotion, they're afraid to do so, right? Because in my case, my father won't approve of me, right? So I'm trying to suppress my own, and you take all those emotions and you bury them inside you. And that is incredibly unhealthy. As this said, the secret sorrows and future difficulties of the good boy or girl begin with their inner need for excessive compliance. You don't want to rock the boat. You want everybody to like you and approve of you. So you suppress your own personality and your own being, right? So you should choose authenticity and not worry so much about attachment. What are people going to say? Are they going to like me? Right? If they like you and you're not being yourself, that means they don't like you. They like some other version of you that you're pretending. So it's better to be you, right? And then people will connect with you anyway. The next one is choose your life. I used to for many years say, why did I have a father who was so harsh? And I didn't know him. I came from this warrior class in India, the caste system. It was a very brutal, abusive, misogynistic environment, right? And I saw lots of terrible behavior and cruelty, and I used to say, why was I born into this kind of family? Why did I have that kind of father? Why was I born into that? We can't choose, right? But I was kind of in a victim mode. I was a victim of my own life. And so what we want to do here is to choose your past. Everything that is part of your life and was part of your childhood and the people that came into your life, they're actually there for a reason. And this came to me at that silent retreat. Because when it's time to eat, they don't ask you, what do you want to eat? They have a bunch of food and you take your tray and they just put the food. Because you're not supposed to communicate. What do I want? How much do I want? None of that, right? And that's kind of what life is like. Life is not a buffet. You can't say, I'm going to have that kind of mother and that kind of father. I want to be born in that religion, in this country, at that time. None of that. Nothing is in your control. You are given all of it. Right? So it's not a buffet. You can't order off a menu. You're given a tray full of stuff. Now, some of it tastes bitter. And some of it looks unappetizing. You don't want to eat it, but it's all there for your good. This is your curriculum for this lifetime. This is what you are meant to experience so that you can evolve your soul and become the person you are meant to be. So for example, one of the realizations that I had that year, I had to experience the worst abuses of the patriarchal, hyper-masculine culture that I was born into so that 50 years later, I would write a book about the feminine, right? Why would I write a book about the feminine? Because I was sensitized to the abuses of that hyper-masculine environment, right? So like that, everything starts to make sense. When you say, you know what, I don't understand it, why these things are in my life, but I choose it, because if you don't choose it, that means you are a victim of it. If you choose it, then it can serve you. So everything starts to connect at some point. What you thought was the worst thing in your life, you look back and said, my God, that was the best thing, right? It all can serve you. And then, of course, you want to live choose the future, which means find your purpose. It's a big part of the work that we do in conscious capitalism. And there are different ways you can find your purpose. Some people go through an intellectual exercise. You may have seen that ikigai, those 4 circles. What am I good at? What do I love to do? What does the world need? What can I get paid? And you find your purpose. That's kind of a thought process, right? Which is good. But there's also, some people find it through spiritual means. If somebody is very religious, they hear a calling from God. I want you to devote your life to this, and that's what they do. For others, including me, it's experiential. You go through life, you know what gives you pain, and you know what gives you joy. So you follow your heartbreak. In my case, I was a business professor who did not believe in the way business was being practiced and taught. I did not believe in marketing, which is what I was a professor of, right? I saw all of the harm that was being done to people and to the planet and to society, just wanting to make more and more money, right? And so this broke my heart, the way we use young women's bodies to sell products. And that leads to eating disorders and body dysmorphia and depression, social media and what it's doing, the way we aggressively market junk food to our children, etc. So I saw all of that, and it really hurt me. Other people didn't care. But I was always asking the question, is there a better way? Can we do business in a different way? Right? Because in my business education, it was all about the head and the wallet. I was never inspired, and I was never touched emotionally, and never inspired. And that's what I was hungry for. That's what I need, and I think all of us need that. And then when I was writing the book called Forms of Endearment, I was suddenly in tears. I had tears of joy. I found another way that you could be in business, with a purpose and with taking care of companies that are loved by customers and employees and communities, etc. Right? I said, wow, I didn't know that there's another way of being in business. Business built on love and not fear and greed. And those businesses are more successful, like 9 times more successful over 10 years in that research that I did for that book, right? So suddenly I was in bliss. I said, oh my God, I found my purpose. My purpose just landed on my shoulder, right? It's the cure for that pain that I was feeling. So if you stay connected to your heart, and if you stay connected to your true self, and you go through life and you see what gives me pain and what brings me joy, that is a hint as to what is your purpose in this life, right? The next one is to express yourself. It's one thing to find your purpose, but you have to bring it out into the world and make some difference happen. And for that, you have to, first of all, choose growth over safety. See, in life, we continually have a fork in the road. This side is growth and this side is safety. And if you always choose safety, you will never grow. And if you never grow, that means you're basically dying. We are meant to grow. We human beings have no upper limit. Every other species has an upper limit on what they can become. A lion can become a bigger lion. That's it. We human beings can change the world. We can become way beyond anything we can imagine. But that only happens if we choose growth, if we are willing to take the risk of not always choosing safety, and that we have to adapt ourselves and prioritize growth over safety. Because the reality is that if you want to do anything meaningful in this life, you're going to have to grow. Our purpose in this life is to grow and to give. And the more we grow, the more we can give. That is the default. If you don't know your purpose, it is to grow and to give. Now you figure out how you're going to grow and how you're going to give. Right? In what way will you give? Make a difference in the world and the lives of others. And so this requires a different version of yourself. So you think about the caterpillar becoming a butterfly. It is the same creature, but it looks nothing alike. And the caterpillar, all it does is eat, and a butterfly spreads light and beauty, and it enables flourishing of nature. Right? No food would exist without butterflies and others, doing the pollination. Right? And it has to die to its own self in order to emerge as a butterfly. We humans have to do that as well. In order to become that larger, potent being that can make a difference in the world, we have to die to our old selves and reinvent something greater. And for that, there's a beautiful framework called the hero's journey, which is by Joseph Campbell. He looked at all of the civilizations across the world, and he found a single myth, a story of this hero who then embarks on this adventure to fight all of the demons and come back with some kind of treasure on behalf of the community. Now, this is a consistent story, and even the movies like Star Wars and Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings and Hunger Games, they all kind of follow that arc. This is the human story, Homer's Odyssey, right? And so all of us actually are on these heroes' journeys, whether we recognize it or not. There's a normal life, and we're feeling okay, and then one day we said, my God, it is not okay. Something has to change, and then we go on that adventure. And that's not easy. We're going to face all these dragons and demons, and we're going to come face to face with our worst shadows. As Joseph Campbell said, the cave that you fear to enter holds the treasure that you seek. So again, you have to have that courage, right, to go there. And then when you come back from that, you will be transformed and you will discover greatness inside yourself you didn't even know existed. And suddenly now, and then you bring back the gift on behalf of the community, right, to the community. And this is a journey that we go through multiple times in our life, but we have to say yes. See, the caterpillar doesn't have a choice. The caterpillar doesn't wake up one day and say, what kind of an empty life am I living? All I do is eat, right? But we have a choice. We human beings have to choose. Am I going to live my life as a caterpillar? I know many 60, 70-year-old caterpillars, okay? All they do is consume and accumulate, and it's all about how much money I have in the bank. They're not doing anything for anybody. But most of us are called on to become that other being, right? So we have to heed that call and say yes. Okay, the next one is to become whole. Why do we need to become whole? See, all of us are born, we have genders, and there's a whole spectrum of gender, right? But ultimately, regardless of that, our journey is towards wholeness. It is about integrating all of that, thank you. It's integrating all of that into a whole being. We have, let's say, masculine energy and feminine energy is present in all of us, whether you're a man, woman, or any gender. But that doesn't mean you're limited to that. In this lifetime, we are supposed to evolve ourselves because every man, as Carl Jung said, has an inner woman. Every woman has an inner man. These are qualities that are available to all humans, and they are defined what it means to be a human is both of those. So we have to move towards wholeness. And this is the work that we did in the book called Shakti Leadership, which is about embracing feminine and masculine together. It is not saying that for thousands of years we have had a male, masculine, energy-driven world where men have controlled everything. The answer is not that now we need a feminine energy-dominated world, because that will have its own problems. It is to say we need a world of wholeness in which we take the healthiest aspects of the masculine energy and the feminine energy and put them together. As Martin Luther King said, we must be tough-minded and tender-hearted. Right? We must have all of these qualities at the same time. And in fact, we take it to the next level of that, which is to say that each of us can manifest 4 kinds of energy. The father energy, the mother energy, but also the elder and the child. The elder energy is wisdom and meaning and purpose. The child is joy and playfulness and creativity. So you can become the wise fool of tough love. This is a phrase Nilima coined, which I love, right? I'm a wise fool of tough love. You can be a wise fool of tough love. Each of us in our own unique way. If we channel all 4 of those things. If we don't, then we are incomplete. Right? And this is about becoming that whole human being. Okay, then the last one is about heal yourself. And that has 3 elements that I highlight here. One is to heal your story. You know, you can tell your story like a victim. Oh, all these terrible things happened to me. Or you can tell your story like a hero. Look at all these things, what I did, I overcame everything. Or you can tell your story like a learner. I learned. Everything that happened, I learned and I grew. Likewise, we have to heal our body. But the biggest thing here is to heal our wounds and traumas which are inside us, the psychic wounds and traumas that we carry. You've all heard of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, right? About 13 million Americans have a diagnosed PTSD. And some of them went to Vietnam or Afghanistan or Iraq or other things. But I believe every single human has some degree of trauma. It's post-traumatic stress injury. We all carry that because life is hard. Difficult things happen to every child. Okay, every child goes through traumatic experiences. Even getting born is traumatic, right, for everybody. And it goes on from there. So different things happen in our life. Most of us never acknowledge because we said, oh, I didn't go to Afghanistan, I didn't go to Iraq, I wasn't caught up in Gaza and all the terrible things that are going on in our world, right? And therefore we say, what right do I have to complain about my problems because other people have bigger problems? Well, the fact that somebody else has a bigger problem doesn't mean your problem is irrelevant. The fact that something is, everybody has it, doesn't mean it's not significant. All of us carry wounds. All of us have to deal with those wounds. And I've come to recognize 4 kinds of trauma. There's personal trauma, things that happen to you directly and you remember them. There's things that happen in your family before you were born. You were not there, but you grew up in the shadow of that trauma and the energetic field that was created. There are things that happen in your ancestors 3, 4, 5 generations ago, and there's trauma in every lineage. And that trauma we're finding through the field of epigenetics still informs how you behave and how you think and how you react to things. It is still affecting our gene expression. We don't even know it. Why are African Americans afraid of dogs? They find the researcher, they're disproportionate, even though they never had a bad experience with a dog. Why? Because during slavery, dogs were used to capture them and to control them. So there's a memory somewhere in the body, right, from generations ago. And then there's a collective trauma of what's going on, the climate change and the Middle East and Ukraine and the pandemic, right? So in my case, I had very severe trauma with my father, which I won't go into here, but it's in the book that I had I didn't know him until I was 7. That was not the trauma. The trauma came later when I wanted to marry somebody. We come from a culture where a lot of people go through an arranged marriage. The parents decide, they pick, and then you get to, say yes or no, but still, it's the parents are primarily involved in that. And I wanted to marry somebody that I chose, and my father said no. And then he said, if you choose her, then you're dead to me. You have to choose this or that. If you marry her, I curse your marriage. And when I didn't listen, he threatened to kill himself. And that was very traumatic. And when I still ultimately didn't listen, then he said, he pointed a gun. He said, I would rather not have a son. And these became really deeply traumatic imprints on me, right? Which for decades, I lived with. And some of these memories I kind of erased. But this was a deep trauma. When your father, you go through that experience with your father, it's very, very painful. So I was carrying that trauma. I have trauma in my family. I come from a feudal culture in which all kinds of terrible things happened in the past. And I became aware of something that happened 75 years ago, what's called an honor killing, where one of my aunts became pregnant before she was married, and this was seen as a deeply shameful thing, and she was actually murdered by somebody in the family. Right? So again, this is deep trauma, and that whole family was impacted for generations after that. And this is a lineage or trauma in my family that I'm carrying. My ancestors were all the warriors trying to fend off the invaders coming into India. India has been invaded more than any other country. And these ancestors were trying to prevent that, and they died, many of them, and their wives and children committed suicide. And then, of course, we have the collective trauma. Do you recognize that head of hair? Who is that? Huh? Yeah. Traumatic. It was traumatic for a lot of us, okay, when he came around. And then, of course, the climate change. So again, there's a lot of trauma. And what do most people do with trauma? They don't do anything. They deal destructively with trauma, which means what? You conceal it, you don't talk about it, and then you numb it with drugs and alcohol, right? It's easy to find any kind of escape mechanism, and then you have to relive it every day. You wake up, so maybe for a few hours after you had a few drinks, you feel okay, but then the next day you're back with that, right? So you get the short-term high, but the long-term low. This was my father for his entire life. He had a lot of trauma. He could never talk about it, never acknowledge it. He had to have 3, 4, 5 drinks every night before he could feel good. He had to take sleeping pills to go to sleep, right? This is the way to numb it, but then next morning it's all back. Right? But there's a better way to deal with it, which is what I'm doing here, and in this book you talk about it, reveal it. Mr. Roger said if it's mentionable, it's manageable. And then you feel it. Allow yourself to feel the pain of what happened when my father did that, right? What happened when my aunt went through that. And then from there, there's a way to heal it. And when we do that, we can experience what is called post-traumatic growth. You are stronger because you had that trauma and you healed than if you never had that trauma in the first place. You become a wounded healer. This is what the Japanese refer to as the art of precious scars. When a piece of pottery breaks, they don't throw it away. They put it back together using gold, dust, and glue. It now becomes a work of art, and it is stronger than the original piece of pottery because you've healed it, you've fixed it along its weakest links, right? The fault lines. This is what we can become. When we heal our wounds, we become this. Those wounds are precious. We are now healers on behalf of other people. If we never experienced that trauma, we could not help other people to the same extent. So for me, this father wound was a deep one. In a patriarchal culture, your father's opinion means a lot. He cut me off for 5 years. He said, I curse your marriage. I had no communication with him. I was bitter and angry. Then I kind of came to a place of forgiveness. I read a book that said, forgive everybody for everything. I said, fine, I forgive him, but not really. Because he never asked. He never said, I'm sorry for what I did. He cursed my marriage. I had a special needs son. And we say, oh my God, my father's curse. I said, no, I don't want to believe that. But then over the years, I came to realize, that he did what he did, and I don't know why, but ultimately you have to accept certain things. And finally, I came to understanding empathy and compassion by the end of his life. I said his father was even more harsh to him than he was to me. Right? He sacrificed many of his dreams for his father. I refused to sacrifice them. Right? My father had a brilliant mind, the most intelligent man I ever met. He could have won a Nobel Prize, but he gave it all up because of his father. He came back to India and he did nothing with his life ultimately. Right? So it was a tragic story. So I had all that compassion, and that was what enabled this father wound to heal. But then I realized at some point, this is actually every generation in my family. My grandfather created a father wound in my father created a wound in me, and I had created a wound in my son. Because I have a special needs son who's very different from me. I was different from my father. He never accepted me. I never fully accepted my son because of all of his problems and challenges. It was difficult or it was traumatic. I came to see him as a burden, as just a responsibility. I didn't see him as a human being, as a whole human being. I just saw him through his defects. And so he's carrying around a father wound, right? He's always saying, do you love me? Are you proud of me? And I would kind of, yeah, you know. So it was a deep wound, and he can't heal it. I have to heal it. So this has been part of the journey of writing this book, is healing that. And then I worked with a coach for the first time. I'm going to be wrapping in 3 minutes. And my coach, after hearing my story, she said, you realize that you spent 45 years of your life trying to impress your father, and now you spend the last 15 years honoring your mother with your work. And that's really been your purpose. You're bringing your mother's energy into business and leadership and into the world. Right? And I said, wow, I didn't know that. I never thought about it that way. And then she said, does your mother know that? And I said, well, I didn't know it. How would my mother know it? She said, you need to call her and tell her that. And I said, we don't talk like that in my family. That would be awkward, you know. We talk about the weather, and we talk about your health and your knees and all that. No, she said, it's important, you must call her. I said, okay, fine. I called her. It became the most healing conversation of my life because I said, Mommy, everything I've done in the world that has made a difference is because of you. In 62 years, she never raised her voice to any of her children, anybody. All she did was love us and take care of us unconditionally. But she thought her life was meaningless, that she was just there to cook and clean, that my father is this brilliant scientist and she's just 8th grade educated, doesn't speak English. You know, and I said that. She said, Raj, I am nothing. I'm nothing. I said, no, you're everything. Without you, I don't know if I'd be here. I don't know if I'd be alive. You know, so it became a very healing conversation for both of us. And, you know, she died within a year. So, you know, if I didn't have that conversation, I mean, that would be such an enormous loss. And one of the lessons that I've learned through all of my healing experiences is exactly that, that love that is not expressed is like a check that is never cashed. It doesn't do any good for anybody. If I had all this love in my heart and I didn't say it to her, would it help heal her towards the end of her life? No. She would die thinking my life was just meaningless, right? So you have to express that love. I urge you, if there's somebody in your life that you have this love and gratitude towards, let them know. Send them a message, call them today, okay? Because after they're gone, it's too late. You have to express that, and it's healing for both of us, both of you. Then I went to the Amazon rainforest, and I had a lot of experiences there with the shamans, and I'll just tell you my biggest vision that came that night. As I said, I want to learn about healing, and the 4 words that came in my vision were the acronym list. It said, everything we do must come from love. Every single action and decision and thought should be rooted in love, not fear, not greed. Most business decisions are rooted in fear and greed, not anger, not jealousy, not envy, but love. Even if you have to fire somebody, let somebody go, do it with love. Next is innocence. We are all born innocent, that when we lose our innocence as we grow up. We don't have a choice, right? Things happen as we're growing up. But can we return to a kind of innocence which says, I will not knowingly cause harm or suffering to another? Okay? I will do what is in my control. I will not knowing. That's living with innocence, not knowingly being the source of suffering for another. Simplicity is the 3rd one. We make life too complicated. And the 4th is truth. What is our commitment to the truth? Truth is more fundamental than peace. Without truth, there is no peace. That's why South Africa had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. Before you can heal, you have to put the truth in front of everybody. America has never done that with slavery or with the indigenous population. Never healed. That's why those wounds keep coming back. We have to acknowledge the truth before they can be healing. And one of the great gifts, again, one day my partner Neha said to me, your son is the list. Your son is incredibly loving. He'll put his cheek up saying, kiss me, and he's just like always affectionate. He's very innocent like a little child. He's 34 years old, but he's like a little child. He keeps life very simple. If he has the basic things, he's the happiest person in the house. And he cannot tell a lie. I said, wow, he's my teacher. He's not a burden. And it's completely changed my relationship. Now we have fun and take him on trips with us, and we just, we have dance parties. I celebrate him now. I don't see him as a defective burden on me. And then in 2019, both my parents died within 3 months of each other. And my mother's message always was this, which is living with innocence, don't cause pain in somebody else's heart. My father's last words to me were these, Raj, you're your own boss. And then he didn't say anything more. I said, well, I think that's a good thing. I don't think anybody should have a boss. Boss is a Dutch word which means slave, master. It comes from slavery. Right? Nobody should have a boss. We don't deserve to be boss. So I think this says we need to be in command of our own lives. We work with other people, but ultimately we are responsible for our lives. And they died, and then the funerals happened. And my father died first, and in that funeral, nobody cried. My mother was the only person who cried. Nobody, even I couldn't cry. My sister didn't cry. Right? I said, wow, it's a big deal, somebody dying, the patriarchs, very sad, but no tears. And then my mother died 4 months later, and nobody could stop crying. There was so much grief. Weeks before, when she was in the hospital, we just couldn't, weeks after, every time we talk together, we cry. I said, wow, at the end of your life, what will be the feeling in the room? Is there going to be grief or relief? When my grandfather died, people were relieved. They said, oh, he's finally gone. Now we can live our life. Now we have freedom, right? Because he was so oppressive. Think about that. If people are happy that you're dying or dead, how sad is that at the end of a life, right? And I know many, by the way, rich people are waiting for them to die. Many rich because of the way they have lived, and people just want their money. When will this old man die so I can get his money? Think about that, right? What that means. So how do we live so that at the end of life there's a lot of not only grief but celebration and gratitude that we were here. So to me the quest boils down to this. My father had great charisma and brilliance and personal power. He did not come from love at all. My mother was unconditionally loving, but she did not ever step into her own power. And why do we have to choose? Why can we not have that unconditional love and cultivate that inner power for each of us? And that's really my wish for all of you, and that's certainly my quest as I go forward. So thank you for being here, and thank you for listening. And I'll stop here.
You have mentioned in different conversations that Awaken, by the way, amazing book, please read it. It's a very personal book, but at the same time, the search and the path for purpose, inner peace, and healing is universal. So thank you for writing this for all of us.
Thank you.
We have some time for 3 or 4 questions on my side, maybe 1 or 2 questions from the audience, so be ready. I'm going to start with one.
Okay.
You were exhorted or invited by a series of important women in your life to go through this healing process, and you went through a series of experiences, you wrote the book. How do you feel today, and what is different from when you started this journey?
Yeah, it's completely different. When I started this journey, I had found my purpose in 2005, right? So after that, we started conscious capitalism. My work became deeply meaningful to me. I was traveling 70-80% of the time, giving 80-90 talks a year all over the world. It was deeply fulfilling, but I was also deeply unhappy. I was not happy in my personal life. I had no peace. I was only happy at the airport and in the hotel, and at home I wasn't, for many reasons. And so I had no peace and I had no real happiness. I thought that happiness is not something I can have in this lifetime. I had kind of given up on that. And now I feel a deeper sense of peace and contentment and deep, deep gratitude, because I've now been able to come to that place of healing with my son, for example, leaving a very difficult marriage and finding, a sort of a soulmate relationship now, doing work that's even at a more elevated level, but also helping other people to heal, because I realize that everything we go through is not just for ourselves, it's on behalf of the community. And so now I'm able to bring this work to leaders, and Nilima and I are working on a program that we teach leaders as well, bringing a lot of this to them, because everybody needs this, everybody needs healing. And if you don't heal yourself, you are going to cause suffering, not only for yourself, but others, the people that you lead. And what I want to do is to eliminate unnecessary suffering on this planet. There's some suffering you cannot avoid. But why must we have unnecessary suffering? One of the other visions I got that night in the rainforest, I got an image of a long line of people waiting to get a hug from this woman from India called the hugging saint, Amma, which means mother. She goes all over the world. People stand in line for 12 hours to get a hug from her. And she doesn't even speak English. And then they walk away in tears because they experienced unconditional love from her. And the message I got was that all these people standing in line, they could be hugging each other. They don't have to wait 12 hours to get a hug from her. That we humans are the source of suffering for each other, but we are also the source of healing for each other. And I think that's what I'm trying to become. I'm trying to take my heritage from that warrior, background that I come from, which I rejected, and I'm saying, no, actually, we have to be warriors, peaceful warriors, on behalf of truth and love and fairness in the world. And we have to be wounded healers. So can we become a peaceful warrior and a wounded healer? And I think that's kind of how I see the rest of my life.
You want to?
Raj,
Yeah.
so this awakening process and healing process happens every day and every moment that you live, but how often do you catch yourself fall into your 60 years of
History,
baggage?
yeah.
And
Well, it's a great question. I say it's one thing to awaken, and it's another thing to stay awake, right? Because you can go back into the old patterns. Those neural pathways are very deep in your brain and in your psyche, right? So it's a matter of, that's what it means to be conscious. That's what it means to be mindful, right? Doing things not automatically, but with awareness. And so I catch myself, for example, I said everything must be done from love. And every night I think, did I act from love today? How many times did I act from fear? Or how many times was it anger or whatever else, right? And how could I do it different? What would have been different if I had done that from love? So it is that constant reminder to yourself and kind of being the observer of yourself, right? Not just being on autopilot and everything, but being actually able to separate that and observe and then correct. We can correct, and that's part of, Nilima and I teach a thing called a presence practice. How do you be fully present, mind, body, soul and spirit in every moment, so you've got that full awareness of what is going on and what am I saying and why am I saying it, etc. So that's a cultivation, that's a practice. Right? It's one thing to get the concept, but then you have to keep practicing it until it becomes second nature. And I think that's really what this ultimately gets to.
Right.
Thank you for your talk. Is your book only a story of your life, or is there a practice there, a method that we can undertake to grow?
Yeah, so at the end of every chapter, I have reflections and I ask questions. So how can you apply this to your life, right? And what lessons are waiting for you to get out of that? So, in the beginning I struggled. I said, why should I tell my story? Everybody has a story, right? But as you say, that which is very personal is also very universal. So even though I'm an Indian kid from a village, born into a feudal culture, and you guys are born here, you would think there's nothing in common, and yet there's so much in common. That's what people say from all over the world. They could connect to so many aspects of it, because these are some universal human experiences. So yeah, the book is very much intended to be also for reflection and application into your own life.
Raj, you mentioned, you have been talking mostly about our own role in our own healing, but I wanted to ask you a question around conscious leadership and the role that we can play in creating organizations, groups, cultures that foster that others can have this path of purpose, inner peace, and healing within themselves. So what can we do also for others?
Well, I think that is what our work is, the course that you and I are teaching. Everybody has that potential to be a conscious leader, but what that means is, first of all, going through all those steps and understanding who are you so that you can lead from that authentic place, and of course healing yourself so you're not leading from a wounded place. And once you do that, then you can express the unique gift that you have through your leadership. And so I think that is a big part of this journey. And connecting people, we go through all of those elements, connecting them to their purpose, helping them realize, what are their innate qualities, what are their strengths, how they can deploy those in the world, what are the things that need healing within them, right? How can they cultivate this sense of wholeness, etc. So I think all of these can be taught. That's the great thing about this. Human beings, everybody can learn from their own experience, but human beings can learn from other people's experience, and I think that's the beauty of this, and I think that's our entire movement really is about that. There's a
Sorry, could someone help me translating because my English is not the best? Please, thank you. Quería preguntarle si nos podría dar como un tip específico, como más tangible o objetivo de una sola cosa que podríamos hacer para precisamente como explicaba como stay awake, por ejemplo, no sé, en los cardiólogos una vez le preguntan una cosa que tú puedas hacer para mejorar tu salud, de que no fumar o el típico de haz 10 minutos de ejercicio al día, algo así que pudiéramos hacer como para tener un reminder de este healing, de, no sé, da un abrazo al día, haz un viaje, algo como más específico.
Is there a specific single thing that it's relevant to stay awake? I know it's multiple things, but if you had to choose one, what will that be?
boy, that's Nilima might have a better answer. I'm going to turn to Nilima.
I know
Give her
it's
the
difficult,
microphone.
I know, but
She's one of my teachers as well, you know.
I think just the ability to insert pause. Whatever's going on in that moment, if you can pause and step back, then there is some hope of making a new response. Otherwise, you are just in autopilot. So the ability to stop, insert, pause, step back, and then decide how you want to react. And so you will not be actually reacting, but responding. So pause. The one thing is pause. Stop. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Nilima. They're telling me that in 3 minutes they need this space for another event. So again, Nilima, thank you. Thank you, Raj, for inspiring us. Thank you for being this tough warrior and spreading love at the same time. Thank you.